being done legally and who really has the law on their side. Joining us now in Washington, Dan Stein. He's Executive Director of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, and here in New York City, immigration attorney Michael Wiles. Michael, first to you, one of the problems here is that there aren't many precedents for a case like this. I mean, you have the fact that that Elian's feet didn't actually touch soil, but the two folks who escaped with him alive were given some kind of status, some kind of resident status, or at least that's in the works. What kind of precedents is this case setting?
I represent several people whose kids have been kidnapped, taken to other countries. This is a historical precedent that's going to be established with this case, and we have to be very careful that there isn't a hysterical reaction that will preempt the law. What's going to happen? What kind
of hysterical reaction? What are you
in
talking
other words,
about?
we have to take it off of the streets in Miami, in other words, and allow the court process to continue its way, because this young man will set the stage for international child abduction cases and law that will be culled out in the years to come. That's why their argument is to allow this just a little longer to ripen in the legal system in the United States.
Well, Dan Stein, one of the things that always creates fear in the hearts of officials in Florida and anywhere along the coast is the threat of uncontrolled exodus into the U.S. Now, Grandma, the official publication of Cuba, has suggested back in March that they may be willing to do that, just to flood our borders with Cuban immigrants. It's happened before. It happened back in 1980. Is there a threat of that happening again?
I think there's always a security interest this country has whenever Castro threatens to basically let the safety valve go. And that's how we got the interdiction agreement in '96, and it's been a characteristic of U.S.-Cuba relations for 40 years. I think that's why we have to be very careful about setting a precedent where you would actually take a child away from his father. The father's in this country now. He's here. He appears to be operating more or less of his own free will. Even if there's an injunction, now because there's an injunction that says the father can't leave with the child, there's even more reason why the Cuban community in Miami needs to let this boy be reunited with his father. And there's no longer any argument. If the argument was they didn't want him to go back to Cuba, well, the father's here now. Every day, every minute delay in reuniting this boy with his father is frankly a crime against humanity.
Well, Dan Stein, a point on that injunction, probably not going to last for that long, right?
I expect.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I mean, I think we're basically talking here about, look, the Cubans in Miami are going to have to start obeying the law. I mean, this country's been enormously generous over 40 years. We've had tremendous amount of immigration from Cuba. They get preferential treatment under U.S. laws.
Dan, let me just let Michael get back in here on that point. How long is this injunction going to last?
The injunction, I think, is only ordered for a few days. I would expect by early next week there would be some adjudication. And the question is whether or not this will make its way to the Supreme Court, and eventually will the Supreme Court accept jurisdiction. The fact is they are on U.S. soil. The child, the whole circumstance has a political feeling to it, and it must be adjudicated under those terms. So far, they've had procedural bites at the apple, but not a substantive day in court. And that's what troubles a lot of people in the legal arena right now. Yes, the Attorney General has the authority to do what she's doing. But the question is whether or not, in her own exercise of discretion, she's abused the process by not letting the boy have a day in court.
Dan, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I respect him. He's an attorney, but the day in court is an elastic statement. The law has been followed in this case. The state custody court, the family court, threw the case out because there is no custody issue. The Attorney General is exercising her powers properly
the fact is
to determine that the father is being recognized as having legal custody. That fact has never been in dispute, and so as a legal matter, absent the injunction,
that matter was in dispute by the government itself, because the INS itself was the one who first said it should go to family court.
Those were early public pronouncements.
The fact remains that ultimately the Immigration Service has always deferred to the state courts on matters of custody, marriage, and all of that. Unless it abrogates public policy, they have no business, the Immigration Service, being involved in a custody matter.
That's
what the lawyers have been arguing continually.
Look, Dan, when the child is in exclusion status, which means he's been paroled in, he's legally at the door. When a father is not in this country and there's no jurisdiction over the father, and when the natural father has been identified by the Department of Justice and there's no reason to believe that there's any question about his fitness, the law operates automatically to give custody to the father.
Dan Stein got the last word. Dan, thank you very much for Washington. Michael Wiles, thank you very much from here in New York. Still ahead, meet the man who swims with the sharks and see our own John Scott taking the plunge with him. Thank you very much.